An individual's reaction to a failed project often mirrors the stages Freud described for mourning a personal loss, revealing grief not for a person but for invested hopes and ambitions. Initially, shock and denial may dominate. Confronted by the collapse of months of planning, perhaps a novel venture that never launched or a research proposal denied funding, the mind recoils. The person experiences an almost numbing disbelief. The numbers did not add up. The audience did not respond. The opportunity slipped away. In these early moments, it can feel as though the world momentarily lost its color, as if the future once foreseen has been amputated. As the shock subsides, pain and anger emerge. The ego, having tied self-worth to achievement, chastises the ID's impulses. Why didn't I see the flaws? How could I have been so naive? This inner tirade erupts in frustration directed at oneself, colleagues, or circumstances. Resentment builds toward mentors who withheld crucial advice, toward partners who failed to deliver, or toward fate itself for being unfair. In group settings, the person may vent acrimony to peers, displaying cynicism that serves as both confession and defense. Freud's second stage, bargaining, materializes as rumination on what-ifs. The mind replays alternative scenarios. If only I had pitched earlier. Had I hired that consultant? What if I'd targeted a different demographic? These mental negotiations aim to reclaim lost control. The person attempts to rewrite history in imagination, hoping that by identifying the precise misstep, they will avert future defeat. Beneath this bargaining lies the unconscious compulsion to prove that failure resulted from correctable errors rather than fundamental inadequacy. When bargaining fails to soothe, depression sets in. The individual withdraws from social interaction, feeling unmotivated to start new endeavors. Projects that once provided meaning now loom as painful reminders, provoking avoidance. The previously energetic professional may skip network events or ignore calls from collaborators. Productivity declines as sustained regret drains emotional reserves. This depressive stage bespeaks the mourning process. Loss of identity, as work and self-esteem were intertwined. Finally, over time and with self-awareness, acceptance emerges. The person acknowledges that the lost project cannot be resurrected, and that pain itself holds lessons. Rather than shrinking from the memory of failure, they reflect on it with curiosity. What desires or fears did the project really satisfy? What unconscious attachments kept them pursuing a goal misaligned with authentic values? This acceptance marks a shift from mourning to metamorphosis. It acknowledges the reality principle's supremacy while honoring id impulses for creativity and purpose. Freud emphasized that mourning requires the gradual detachment of libidinal energy invested in the lost object. In the case of a failed initiative, the individual must consciously withdraw emotional investment from that venture, allowing psychic energy to redirect toward new aims. Rushing this process, immediately embarking on a new project without fully experiencing grief, risks pathological repetition, wherein the person reenacts the same mistakes, unconsciously searching for the lost fulfillment. Growth resides in fully walking through each stage. Shock alerts the psyche to a significant rupture. Anger mobilizes energy to confront the unexpected. Bargaining surfaces patterns of thought that require reframing. Depression deepens understanding of loss's gravity. Acceptance liberates creative energy for fresh pursuits. Together, these stages mirror a rite of passage for ambition, transforming the individual's relationship with failure from victimhood to mastery. Freud taught that engaging with the unconscious roots of mourning deepens this transformation. Dreams of renovation, of rebuilding collapsed structures, may signal the ID's desire for renewal. Free association about the failed venture uncovers hidden attachments to past identities or earlier successes. Analyzing these associations reveals why certain outcomes felt tantamount to annihilation. For instance, a researcher whose multi-year grant collapsed may discover that the grant represented a bid for parental approval internalized from early childhood. Recognizing this link allows release of the unmet longing in one domain without discarding the fundamental drive to create. This understanding also reframes loss into an opportunity for synthesis. Rather than viewing the failed project as wasted effort, the person recognizes accumulated skills, networks, and insights as libidinal investments now liberated for new directions. The mourning process facilitates this transfer of energy. As emotional bonds to the old goal dissolve, inner motivation re-enters the consciousness with fresh purpose. Thus, Freud's stages of mourning and loss provide a roadmap for navigating the pain of failed projects. By consciously traversing shock, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, individuals transform the psychic residue of defeat into fertile ground for growth. Through psychoanalytic reflection on the unconscious drivers of attachment and identity, the lost ambitions become teachers rather than tombstones. The person learns that letting go is not erasing memory but reorganizing desire, honoring past efforts while charting renewed paths forward. Regret over missed opportunities often evolves into a pathological attachment, with the mind repeatedly returning to what might have been and draining energy from present endeavors. In the aftermath of a failed startup bid or a declined fellowship, the individual may cling unconsciously to the lost chance, treating it as if its revival could restore self-worth. Freud observed that libidinal energy invested in a lost object must be mourned and withdrawn. When this process stalls, melancholic attachment emerges, anchoring the psyche to past disappointments. This attachment manifests in rumination, endless mental loops replaying pivotal moments, drafting the final proposal, rehearsing the pitch, waiting for the call. Each replay intensifies a sense of culpability, as if the self can be punished or perfected through perpetual self-scrutiny. Rather than freeing creative potential, the mind becomes a hall of mirrors reflecting only past failure. New projects are approached tentatively, shadowed by the specter of what was lost, inhibiting full investment in present goals. A second expression is avoidance. To dodge the sting of regret, the individual may steer clear of any similar scenario, refusing new grant applications, avoiding networking events, or declining invitations to collaborative ventures. This protective strategy artificially limits exposure to potential disappointment, but also blocks avenues for growth. The superego's demands, "never fail like that again," become a tyrant that suffocates ambition. Ironically, this bound self then feels further regret for unexplored paths, reinforcing the attachment to what was once possible. Freud would describe this as pathological mourning, in which the ego cannot separate from the lost object. Unlike healthy mourning that gradually reallocates emotional energy, pathological mourning embeds the past wound as a defining identity marker. I am the person who lost that contract. This identity impedes self-renewal. The unconscious mind, in seeking to maintain continuity, resists releasing the lost opportunity. The person fears that letting go equates to annihilating a part of the self crafted around that project. A third dynamic arises in perfectionism. The individual may escalate standards for new endeavors, insisting on flawlessness to prevent a repeat of past loss. Every outline must be more detailed, every presentation more polished, every partner carefully vetted. Though these demands seem prudent, they often cross into paralysis. New ventures never fully lift off the ground because they never feel good enough. Thus, the superego's strict criteria, born from early failure, ensnare the ego in an endless call for unattainable perfection. Understanding these patterns as defenses against unconscious pain is the first step. Freud taught that uncovering the unconscious roots of attachment to loss, regret, or perfection releases its grip. Free association exercises enable the individual to speak uninterrupted about the failed chance, what it symbolized, why its loss felt catastrophic, how it connected to earlier life experiences of abandonment or inadequacy. In bringing these associations to light, the ego can differentiate between the past wound and current identity. Dream analysis further exposes attachment dynamics. Recurring dreams of being unprepared for a performance or arriving late to an exam echo waking fears of having missed the boat. Recording dreams and exploring their emotional undertones reveals the symbolic connections between lost opportunities and deeper insecurities, perhaps tied to childhood fears of failing parental expectations. Recognizing these symbols demystifies the attachment, allowing the person to understand that the past project served as a stand-in for long-standing fears of rejection or unworthiness. Working through pathological mourning also involves facilitating a conscious farewell ritual, writing a letter to the lost opportunity, expressing gratitude for lessons learned, and acknowledging the pain allows emotional energy to discharge. The letter is then ceremonially discarded or burned, symbolizing the mind's willingness to let go. This ritual bridges the gap between unconscious attachment and conscious release, signaling that while memories remain, their emotional hold does not. Transference insights can be applied. Feelings toward past mentors or collaborators who influenced the failed project often transfer onto new figures. In therapy or mentoring circles, noticing triggers, resentment when feedback arrives, reluctance to trust colleagues, alerts the individual to unresolved attachments. Discussing these reactions helps separate current relationships from echoes of past disappointments, weakening unconscious bonds to the lost chance. Crucially, new investments must feel emotionally safe. The mentee of a failed venture benefits from small successes, micro-commitments that carry low stakes, yet yield positive reinforcement. Submitting a brief concept note, hosting a casual brainstorming session, or sharing a preliminary prototype with trusted peers cultivates renewed confidence. As these low-risk exposures accumulate, the unconscious learns that engagement can lead to growth rather than grief. In dismantling pathological attachment, the individual reclaims libidinal energy for present and future projects. The mourning process transitions from endless rumination to constructive reflection. Regret transforms into a source of insight. Understanding why a project mattered clarifies one's core values and desired direction. Rather than mourning indefinitely, the person channels emotional intensity into new pursuits aligned with authentic drives. Thus, pathological attachment to missed opportunities weakens as unconscious patterns are brought to light and consciously addressed through reflection, dream work, farewell rituals, and graded re-engagement. Freed from the compulsive grip of regret, the individual can redirect energy toward meaningful goals, transforming past loss into informed drive. Professional setbacks can leave lingering wounds when ambitions collide with reality, demanding an analytic approach to process disappointment and reclaim agency. Freud's concept of working through involves repeatedly confronting a conflict in consciousness until its unconscious charge dissipates. In the workplace, this means facing feelings stirred by missed promotions, failed pitches, or abandoned collaborations rather than suppressing them under a veneer of competence. When feedback arrives, declined, delayed, or devalued, it often reactivates early wounds of rejection. A clinician's rejected paper may echo childhood experiences of criticism, provoking shame that undermines confidence. Instead of masking pain with forced cheer, working through invites the individual to articulate emotions, acknowledging hurt, resentment, or embarrassment aloud in a trusted setting. Allowing these feelings to surface in team debriefs or peer mentoring groups interrupts repression and weakens unconscious resistance to change. Free association exercises adapted to professional contexts further illuminate hidden resistances. Journaling without censoring thoughts about a failure, recording every judgment, excuse, and self-critique maps the psychic terrain. This stream of consciousness reveals recurring themes: fear of incompetence, need for external validation, or envy of successful peers. Recognizing these patterns clarifies why certain projects triggered defensive avoidance or overinvestment, guiding targeted interventions. Transference offers another lens. Reactions to supervisors often mirror dynamics with earlier authority figures. A harsh critique from a manager may summon echoes of a parental reprimand, inflaming disproportionate defensiveness. By reflecting on these parallels, perhaps with a coach or in supervision, the professional discerns which reactions stem from the present context and which replay childhood resentments. This insight dissolves the power of transference, enabling more constructive responses to feedback and collaboration. Dream analysis also has a place in professional healing. Recurring work-related dreams of public speaking disasters or being locked out of the office symbolize anxieties about competence and belonging. Variations on these themes point to unresolved conflicts. Locked doors may represent unacknowledged guilt, restless searches for a missing key mirror, the ego's quest for solutions. Discussing dream content with a mentor or therapist helps integrate symbolic messages, reducing unconscious anxieties that hinder performance. Reworking identification patterns facilitates recovery. Freud noted that identification with a lost object can prolong mourning. A professional who invested identity in a single flagship project must gradually diversify sources of self-worth, engaging in varied tasks, mentoring juniors, public speaking, writing articles, reallocates libidinal energy across multiple domains. Each new achievement, no matter how small, rebuilds a resilient professional identity, less vulnerable to single-point failures. Counter-transference awareness also safeguards teamwork. Colleagues' reactions to disappointment can unwittingly reinforce shame. Pity evokes helplessness. Dismissiveness fuels resentment. Cultivating empathy balanced with accountability, teams can develop reflective practices, after-action reviews that invite emotional sharing alongside tactical analysis. This collective working through fosters a culture where setbacks projects become learning opportunities rather than sources of stigma. Finally, Freud advised patience in working through. The analytic process unfolds over time through repetition. Similarly, professionals benefit from scheduled reflection sessions, weekly journaling, or monthly peer reviews to revisit unresolved conflicts and reassess progress. This disciplined revisiting prevents premature closure and reinstates the ego's capacity to integrate new insights. By systematically applying psychoanalytic tools, free association, transference examination, dream exploration, diversified identification, and disciplined review, individuals transform career disappointments into catalysts for growth. The melancholic fixation loosens, and the ego gains strength, enabling the pleasure of creative engagement to re-enter professional life. Each setback thus becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block, as working through deepens self-knowledge and fuels renewed drive. When ambitions collapse, Freud's concept of sublimation offers a constructive pathway to channel the libidinal energy bound up in lost dreams toward new creative and productive ends, rather than abandoning the underlying impulses that drove the failed project. Whether a yearning to educate, innovate, or inspire, the individual learns to redirect them into socially acceptable outlets that enhance personal growth and contribute value. At the core of sublimation lies the transformation of instinctual desires into higher cultural or intellectual activities. A scientist whose grant application was rejected might redirect analytical rigor into writing a popular science article, shaping technical expertise into accessible narratives that engage broader audiences. The original drive to discover remains intact but finds expression in a new form, mitigating the sense of failure and preserving psychic energy. Similarly, an entrepreneur who watched a product prototype falter may turn innovation impulses toward mentoring early-stage founders, channeling strategic skills into coaching roles. Here, the desire to foster success survives in a different capacity. Through training sessions, the entrepreneur transposes lessons learned from personal setbacks, rescuing creative energy from stagnation and offering communal support. Artists often exemplify sublimation. A filmmaker whose crowd-funded project collapsed might pivot to teaching masterclasses, translating cinematic vision into educational workshops. The creative impulse to tell stories retains potency, now infused with the gratification of guiding others. This shift honors the pleasure principle's yearning for creation while satisfying the reality principle's demand for achievable, socially sanctioned activities. Psychoanalytically, the individual must first acknowledge and mourn the lost dream to free the repressed energy tethered to it. This acknowledgement parallels the mourning stages, accepting defeat, confronting associated guilt, and ultimately releasing emotional attachment. Only when the psyche relinquishes its hold on the ruined venture does sublimation become possible. The liberated libido then flows into novel, constructive channels. Freud observed that sublimation often produces culturally significant achievements, art, literature, scientific breakthroughs, precisely because it harnesses robust instinctual forces. For professionals, the equivalent may be launching innovative programs, publishing thought leadership, or spearheading community initiatives. A failed app developer might organize a hackathon, channeling technical passion into collaborative energy that ignites collective creativity. To facilitate sublimation, the individual can employ creative constraints that mirror elements of the original dream, but with new parameters. For instance, a writer whose screenplay was unproduced could commit to daily journaling prompts around themes from that script, forging a personal essay collection that explores similar motifs. These constraints reframe the material, inviting fresh perspectives and sustaining creative momentum. Structured brainstorming sessions aid sublimation by externalizing ideas and enabling novel combinations. The individual gathers colleagues or peers for idea-swapping workshops, presenting fragments of the failed endeavor and soliciting imaginative applications, translating a defunct marketing campaign into a social media art project, for example. The collaborative process reframes disappointment as a generative force, reinforcing that abandoned projects still harbor valuable seeds for future work. Self-reflection journals optimized for sublimation track shifts in energy allocation. Each entry monitors time and enthusiasm devoted to legacy projects versus emerging pursuits, ensuring that new activities receive sufficient libidinal investment. By consciously redirecting passion, the person avoids reverting to nostalgia for the lost dream and instead fosters commitment to fresh goals. Therapeutic dialogue can uncover unconscious resistances to sublimation. Guilt over abandoning a passion project may hinder engagement with new outlets. Discussing this guilt with a mentor or therapist reveals its roots: fear of betraying initial aspirations or shame about giving up. Once surfaced, these resistances can be negotiated. The individual reframes sublimation not as abandonment, but as evolution, retaining core desires while embracing adaptive expression. Group rituals also support sublimation. Professionals can form transformation circles, meeting regularly to share how they repurpose energies from past failures. Witnessing others' successes in converting disappointment into productive ventures normalizes the process and provides inspiration. As members update their projects and creative pivots, collective affirmation bolsters confidence to pursue unconventional outlets. Over time, sublimation recalibrates the balance between ID and superego demands. Creative expression satisfies instinctual impulses, while socially sanctioned channels appease moral or professional standards. The ego, less torn by conflicts between desire and duty, matures into a mediator that orchestrates both realms. This integration not only diminishes the sting of past failures, but enriches the individual's sense of purpose. Successful sublimation often yields surprising synergies. A researcher might discover that public science communication sparks collaborations leading back to original areas of inquiry, reinvigorating academic work with renewed funding opportunities. A designer's pivot to workshop facilitation may attract clients seeking bespoke consulting services, launching a consultancy that transcends initial product goals. Thus, by consciously converting the psychic energy of thwarted projects into alternative creative and social contributions, individuals transform regret into drive. Freud's theory of sublimation serves not just as an intellectual concept, but as a practical framework for career and personal renewal. By honoring instinctual desires while guiding them into new, constructive mediums, professionals transcend the confines of failure, harnessing its latent energy to fuel sustained growth and innovation. Transforming regret into forward momentum requires structured rituals that integrate insight, emotional processing, and action, creating a disciplined pathway from mourning to meaningful engagement. Freud's psychoanalytic framework underpins these rituals, emphasizing conscious acknowledgement of loss, symbolic enactment of release, and gradual reallocation of psychic energy. The reflection dialogue forms the first ritual. Each morning, the individual engages in a written conversation between the self that endured failure and the self that aspires to growth. The morning self voices residual pain and lingering questions. I still feel hollow after that funding rejection. Why can't I stop replaying that pitch? The aspiring self responds with empathy and guidance. Your heartbreak shows how much you care. These feelings signal values worth preserving. This dialogue externalizes inner conflict, fostering self-compassion and reinforcing the reality principle's perspective that past failures need not define future possibilities. The second ritual, micro-commitment exposures, structures incremental challenges that build resilience. Drawing from graded exposure therapy, the individual lists 5 low-stakes tasks: sending an exploratory email, sketching a project outline, volunteering a new idea in a meeting, each escalating in complexity. Scheduling 1 micro-commitment every 2 days, they note pre- and post-action reflections, sensations, thoughts, and outcomes. This ritual demystifies fear of failure by demonstrating that small efforts, even when imperfect, yield valuable feedback. Over weeks, these exposures recalibrate the unconscious expectation of disappointment, normalizing proactive engagement. Symbolic farewell ceremonies serve as the third ritual to release lingering attachments. The individual identifies 1 concrete symbol of past failure, a copy of the rejected proposal, a prototype mock-up, or a dated project plan. In a mindful ceremony, they thank the symbol for lessons learned, then choose an act of transformation, tearing, burning, or repurposing it into art. The sensory experience of this ceremony, sight of ashes, sound of tearing, or creation of a collage, cements the emotional separation from the lost object. By ritualizing letting go, the psyche receives clear permission to withdraw libidinal energy from past projects. Imagined rehearsal, the fourth ritual, harnesses mental practice to integrate new narratives. Before embarking on significant tasks, the individual spends 10 minutes visualizing the process and outcome, drafting a spin-off concept, receiving supportive feedback, and feeling curiosity rather than dread. They imagine navigating obstacles with composure. This visualization engages unconscious patterning, priming neural pathways that align desire with conscious strategy. Coupled with real-world micro-commitments, mental rehearsal accelerates confidence and embeds adaptive scripts. The final ritual, the affirmation anchor, roots renewed purpose in daily life. Each evening, the person crafts one affirmation reflecting insights from the day's rituals. Each effort teaches me more. I honor my ambition by evolving. Failure expands my drive for excellence. They recite this affirmation aloud while touching a tactile anchor, a stone, bracelet, or ring, bridging conscious intention with sensory memory. Over time, this ritual strengthens the unconscious association between daily practice and positive self-concept, aligning ID desires for achievement with a tempered superego's acceptance of imperfection. Together, these rituals form a cohesive program that dismantles pathological mourning and fosters sublimation and working through in action. Reflection. Dialogue clarifies emotional conflicts. Micro-commitment. Exposures rebuild behavioral confidence. Symbolic farewell ceremonies enact emotional release. Imagined rehearsal programs, adaptive responses. Affirmation anchor consolidates new identity. The iterative cycle, ritual, reflection, rehearsal, releases the past's hold and channels energy into creative endeavors. As these practices become habitual, noticeable shifts occur. The individual greets opportunities with measured anticipation rather than paralyzing fear. Moments of doubt invite the reflection dialogue instead of automatic rumination. Missed chances lose their grip as farewell ceremonies carry emotional weight into transformation. Visualization and micro-exposures reinforce each other, creating a feedback loop of competence and curiosity. Daily affirmations anchor identity in continuous growth rather than fixed achievements. Freud taught that sustained change arises through working through unconscious conflicts with patience and self-awareness. These rituals embody that teaching, providing structured steps to metabolize loss and transmute regret into drive. In this ritual integration, letting go becomes an active, purposeful process rather than passive resignation. The individual emerges not as someone defined by past failures, but as a resilient architect of future possibilities, guided by psychoanalytic insight and empowered by disciplined practice.